was a young man named John who lived in a small town in South Carolina. He was a popular fellow and he was known throughout the area for being honest and hardworking. Although he wasn't wealthy, he made a good living doing odd jobs for the local townspeople. John was the most eligible bachelor in town and every woman was jumping the chance to be his wife. However, John had his eyes set on a beautifully mysterious young woman who lived alone in a small cabin deep in the woods. She was incredibly beautiful, with long dark hair, smooth pale skin, and piercing green eyes. Whenever she came to town, she turned the heads of all men as she walked past. But word around town was that she was a little strange, and it was best to stay away from her. However, John couldn't get the mysterious woman out of his mind. One night, there was a dance held in the town, and all locals attended it. The moment John walked through the door, he noticed the beautiful woman from the woods. He worked up the courage to speak to her, and before he knew it, they were dancing the night away. By the next evening, they were wed, and John brought his pretty bride to the nice little cottage he rented just down the road from the family grocery. It had been a nice front porch with a swing, a big bedroom on the second floor, and a big attic with window that could be made up into second guest room should his new mother-in-law care to visit from her home in the swamp. After fixing him nice dinner, John's new bride sat a while in the rocking chair near the bed while John yawned and watched her fondly. She cuddled under the blanket and knitted and hummed, and John's eyes grew heavy. He didn't wake up early when his new bride crept into bed all hot and sweaty and fell asleep at once. When he asked her where she'd been, she wouldn't answer him. John was mighty sore that his bride had snuck out on him on their wedding night. But when she got snappish and her eyes blazed like they did when he questioned her, he grew frightened and backed down. Life took an odd pattern for John. During the day, everything was perfect. His wife was sweet and pretty and loving. She kept the house sparkling clean and cooked him wonderful meals. But each night, she refused to come to bed after supper. Like their wedding night, she sat up singing and rocking and knitting until he was asleep and did not come to bed till just afore dawn. She was always sweaty and cranky when she came to bed, and she went to sleep before John could question her. John was very confused and upset by this behavior and finally confided in his pa one morning after opening up the grocery store. John's pa was awful worried. The visiting priest had gone on his next parish and there was no one they could consult but the local conjure woman. So he sent John to her with a couple of chickens as a gift. The conjure woman knew all about hoodoo magic and was an excellent herbalist. Local folks went to her when they were sick on account of the doctor lived 20 miles away. When she heard John's story, she told him to pretend to go to sleep that night and watch what his new bride did. Then he was to come back and tell her everything. John agreed. The next evening after supper, John yawned and pretended he was very tired. He went to bed and pretended to fall asleep. His wife was rocking back and forth in her chair, but when she thought he was sound asleep, she got up and tiptoed upstairs. John followed her and saw her going up to the attic. He watched through a crack in the door as she took off her clothes and sat naked at her spinning wheel. She put her foot on the pedal and pumped it up and down. The wheel began to spin and spindle began to turn. His wife pulled on one of her fingers and the skin came off her hand just like a glove. She pressed her hand to the spindle and her skin began to wrap around like a yarn. "Spin, spin, reel off skin," she cried. As he watched in horror, she spun off all her skin. It wrapped around the spindle like a blobby blob, leaving his wife a red flashless thing with pulsing red muscle and sinew. Her eyes had no lids, and they stared like the eyes of a skinned pig's head in a butcher shop window. She was a terrifying sight, and she sprang through the window and flew away into the night. John ran out to the privy and was sick after he saw her. Who was the monster he had married? He was still trembling and in shock when his bride, looking like a normal person again, crept into the bed at dawn, and he had trouble behaving normally at breakfast. As soon as he could get away, John ran to the home of the conjure woman and told her about the spinning wheel and the terrible skinless creature who flew away from his attic. "A boo hag," the conjure woman said at once. "You've married a boo hag." "What's a boo hag?" asked John. "A boo hag is a witch and a shapeshifter," said the conjure woman. "She lures men into her trap and then delivers them to her boo daddy, who eats their flesh and gnaws their bone. And that's what she'll do if you don't get rid of her first." The conjure woman told John to get himself some blue paint. As soon as the boo hag left the house at night, he was to spread blue paint on every window frame and every door frame and make sure it was 2 coats thick. A boo hag couldn't fly through a window or door that was painted blue, and if she didn't get back into her skin before dawn, she would be trapped without it and be revealed for the monster she saw. So, he was to leave one tiny window unpainted and keep it open, a silver so the boo hag could squeeze through. Then he was to fill up her skin with salt and pepper, which would burn her up from inside out. And John promised to do exactly as the conjure woman said. That night, John lingered over his dinner, looking with sad eyes at the pretty woman sitting opposite him. He knew she was really a monster inside, but it was so nice to have a little wife in his home. He hated like anything to see her go, but he didn't want to get eaten by a boo daddy. That was his fate if she stayed. So he went up to their bedroom and pretended to fall asleep, while she rocked and sang and knitted. Then he followed her quietly upstairs and put salt and pepper into her skin after her ugly, red-muscled, blue-veined figure had flown out of the window to her boo daddy. He spent the rest of the night painting over every door and window frame with blue paint, leaving only one small unpainted window open in the cellar. He nailed it up so that it would open no further than a crack, just as the conjure woman had instructed him. Then he hid himself behind a large chest of drawers up in the attic to wait for the boo hag. Just before dawn, the boo hag came flying up into the attic window. As soon as she touched the blue frame, she gave a shriek of pain and rage. John listened as she flew around the house, testing each window and door and howling like a banshee when it burned her skinless hands. Then she found the little window in the cellar, and he heard the thump as she landed beside it, followed by a painful whimpering sound as she squeezed and squeezed herself through the narrow opening, her skinless red muscles and blue veins tearing painfully against the rough wood. The boo hag ran up 3 flights of stairs into the attic and squeezed into her skin as fast as she could. She just barely got it on when the first light of dawn shone over the horizon. And that was when the salt and pepper did their work, burning the boo hag's body from inside out. With a scream of agony, she flung herself out of the attic window. The glass shattered everywhere as she tried to fly away, tearing at the skin to get it off. But it was too late. She exploded into tiny pieces right over the swamp, and the alligators had them a mighty feast of cooked boo hag for breakfast that morning. So John was once again without a wife. But bachelorhood looked much better to him after that, and he never went looking for a wife again. There was an old man who lived alone in the middle of the forest. He must have been 60 years old, but nobody knew his real name. Most folks just called him Old Jake. He had 3 loyal hunting dogs that kept him company on long, lonely nights, Their names were I Know, You Know, and Calico. He lived in an old cabin he had built himself way back in the deep dark woods. It wasn't very big, but it was just enough for him and his dogs. The cabin only had one room in it, and that was his bedroom, his living room, his dining room, and his kitchen too. At one end of the room, there was a nice big open fireplace where he could cook his supper and warm his bones on the cold winter nights. Old Jake loved hunting, fishing, and great outdoors. He had a little garden where he planted vegetables, and he would go out every day to hunt for rabbits and fish. During the warm months, there was more than enough food to go around, but in the colder months, it was hard to keep his belly full. One cold winter night, the old man's stomach was grumbling, but there was nothing to eat in the cupboards but a few moldy potatoes. He stoked the fire in the fireplace to keep the cabin warm, and he went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard something in the room. He opened his eyes just in time to see a shadow creeping across the wall. When he sat up in bed and peered into the darkness, his eyes grew wide in terror. Sitting across the room from him was the weirdest looking creature he had ever seen. It was short and stubby, with pointed ears and bright yellow eyes that seemed to burn with some strange fire. Its body was covered in black fur, and it had big sharp claws and a long thick tail. For a moment Jake sat up there frozen in fear. He stared at the hideous creature, and it stared back at him. Then, quick as a flash, he grabbed his hunting knife and lunged at the thing. It sprang up and scurried out of the hole it had clawed in the cabin wall. The thing was fast, but so was Jake. A split second before it escaped, he brought his knife down squarely on its big tail and cut it off. The creature let out a horrible screech and disappeared into the night. Old Jake was left standing there with a long, thick tail in one hand and a bloody knife in the other. Jake was about to throw the tail outside when his stomach started rumbling again. He was famished with the hunger, so he took the tail, cleaned it, cooked it, and ate it for his supper. It tasted a bit strange, but there was a lot of it, and it was very chewy. In fact, it kind of tasted like chicken. With his stomach full, old Jake plugged up the hole in the cabin wall with some old rags and newspapers. Then he got back into the bed and drifted off to sleep. He hadn't been asleep for very long before he was awakened by a strange noise. It sounded like something trying to scratch its way into the cabin. The old man thought that if he stayed really quiet, the thing might go away. He could hear it scratch, scratch, scratch. But then a strange voice outside hissed, "Tailipo, Tailipo, I want my Tailipo." He thought he must be imagining things, but then he heard it again. "Tailipo, Tailipo, I want my Tailipo." Old Jake jumped out of the bed, ran to the front door and threw it open. He called out his dogs, "I know, you know, Calico. Get over here." The dogs, they came tearing up to the cabin and ran around barking and sniffing and snarling. Couldn't find a thing. Jake shrugged his shoulders and went back to bed again. He was just about to drift off to sleep when he heard the noise again. This time, he was scratching sounded like it was coming from the window. Whatever it was really wanted to get in, but the scratching seemed to be on two walls at one time. Then he heard the strange voice again, and this time it hissed a little louder. "Tailipo, Tailipo, where is my Tailipo?" Old Jake, who wasn't one to frighten easily, was getting a little shaky. This was getting really weird, so he eased to the window and called, "I know, you know, Comtico Calico. Come on over here and see what this scratching at my house." The three dogs bounded up to the porch, and they sniffed around and barked and sniffed, but they never found anything at all. Jake decided to stay up the rest of the night to protect himself, his dogs, and his little cabin. So he pulled a chair next to the fireplace, grabbed a blanket from his bed and settled in for the rest of the wind-chilled, wintry night. Sleep soon overtook him and once again he dozed off. It was almost dawn when Jake woke up with a start. The sound of scratching seemed to reverberate from every area of the cabin. Jake searched frantically for his axe, his rifle, or something to defend himself with, but he was so frightened he couldn't find anything. The scratching grew louder and louder and louder. "Tailipo, Tailipo, give me back my Tailipo." Jake yelled back, "Leave me alone. I ain't got your Tailipo." Then he called his dogs, but this time the dogs didn't come. He waited and waited, but still not a single dog came running. Jake had never been so scared in his life. He ran to his bed and jumped in. The scratching and the voice grew louder and louder and louder. "Tailipo, Tailipo, give me back my Tailipo." Jake yelled back as loud as he could, "I ain't got no Tailipo, so why don't you leave me alone and go on about your business? I ain't never hurt nobody or nothing, just leave me alone." The scratching seemed to be inside the house now, and the voice was so loud it was deafening. "Tailipo, Tailipo, you took my Tailipo. Now I'm back to get it. Give it to me now." Jake pulled the cover up and over his head and stayed as quiet as he could, but the scratching was now in his room. "Tailipo, Tailipo, you better give me back my Tailipo." Jake then felt the thing scratching up the bottom of the bed and onto the cover. Jake eased the cover down to see what was steadily approaching. Then he saw it. A short, stubby creature with pointed ears, fat feet with long claws and bloodshot red eyes that glowed in the dark. Eyes that seemed to burn straight through. Before he could pull the covers over his head again, the thing pounced on his chest, looked straight down at him and said, "You got my Tailipo and you better give it back to me now." Jake yelled, "I ate it. I ate your Tailipo. It's gone." And that thing started to scratch and claw and tear away at poor old Jake, trying to get the Tailipo back. Jake tried to fight back, but that thing was too strong and those claws were too sharp. Jake's screams echoed through the dark mountains, then stopped, leaving a chilling silence. After a month or two without hearing from old Jake, the townspeople got worried and came looking for him. They hiked up the mountain and through the forest, but when they reached his cabin, they found it had been torn to shreds. There was no sign of Jake or the dogs. They searched the woods and called out to them, "Jake, I know, you know, Calico," but there was no answer. Old Jake and his dogs were never seen again. The townspeople say that if you are all alone out there at night and you listen carefully, you can hear a strange voice calling on the wind. "Tailipo, Tailipo, now I've got my Tailipo."